Imagine being stuck away in a faraway country, taken captive there, away from your family, your friends, and your country. And then you're put in position of authority by that country, but yet you find yourself in a compromising position and it requires you to take a stand. How would you respond to this? Well, we find out there was three boys that found themselves in this scenario, and in the Bible it shows that they arose to the occasion and overcame, and God was with them. Let's talk about it. In the book of Daniel, we read at the very beginning of the book that Daniel and Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego are all taken away captive to the land of Babylon. And they, because they are smart young men, very smart, they are put in the king's palace to serve there and to help with the wise men. Well, there came a time where the king sent his meat for them to eat, all of these boys. And Daniel, the Bible says, purposed in himself that he wouldn't defile himself with the king's meat. And so he requested that himself and Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego all be given vegetables to eat instead of the meat being offered to them, because it was meat offered to idols, of course. And they refused it, and the person that took care of that said, the king will kill me if you guys have less weight on you than the rest of them. And Daniel said, you watch. It will work out the way it needs to. And sure enough, he did what Daniel requested, took a stand, and they were fairer and fatter than all the other men in the kingdom. And there was another time where Daniel was the only person in the palace that could interpret the king's dream, and he was put to a place of authority. And it seems like as you read the book of Daniel that out of these four young men, that Daniel was the leader of the group as you read the book. But there came a time where Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego found themselves without Daniel being present. Now, we don't know why Daniel was not there in this particular chapter. Maybe the king had sent him away on a trip to check on some other parts of his kingdom. We don't know. But we just know Daniel wasn't in the story in this particular chapter. And so we read where the king made a command. He built this graven image, this large image, and wanted everybody to bow down and worship the image, everybody in the kingdom. And he said, when the music is played, you must bow down to this image. But Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego decided, we can't do this. This compromises our faith. We only serve the true and living God. We don't worship idols. And so they said, we're not going to bow. And when the king found out that these leaders of his that he put in charge of things would not bow to his idol, he got angry with them. And he commanded that the fire be heated 7 times more, and said, okay, for your punishment and your judgment, I'm going to have you thrown in the fiery furnace. And he made this declaration for everybody in the kingdom. If you didn't bow to my idol, you're going to be thrown in the fiery furnace. But they said, we're not going to bow. And they said, we believe our God will deliver us. But even if he doesn't, we're not going to bow to this image. And so sure enough, he took them, had his men take them up, and the fire was so hot that it said that the men that took them to throw them in the fire, they were burned with the fire and died themselves. And it says that they dropped them in the fire, they fell in there, but while they were in there, the only thing that was burnt was the ropes that were on there that tied their bodies. And he looked inside the fire, Nebuchadnezzar did, and sure enough, these 3 young men were up and walking. The fire was not burning them. And as he looked in the fire, he saw a 4th man that he said, this 4th man must be some kind of god. Well, we know it was Christ in the fire. His Christological spirit body was in the fire with them, protecting them at this time. And so he immediately commanded, when he saw they weren't being burned, to pull them out of the fire. And then he had to admit that their God was the true and living God. And he apologized, and he changed his declaration from worshiping this image, that everybody in the kingdom had to worship Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego's God. See, these young men were put in a vulnerable position. Their leader, Daniel, the person that they had followed all their life, was away. And they were required on their own to stand. And they arose to the occasion, and they stood. And so I want to just draw out 2 lessons from this Bible passage. And number 1 is first about Daniel. Daniel was a great leader because he didn't just become the spokesperson for these young men and say, hey, just follow my lead. I'm going to take care of it for us all. but he taught them, I believe, personally, he taught them how to stand by his example. See, great teachers, their students don't only learn what they teach them, but they also learn what they live before them. Great teachers also must be great mentors. And Daniel must have been a great mentor to these young men, because when it counted, they stood for God. They said some things are caught rather than taught. And this must have been the case with these three young men. The second thing I see is these three young men must have been great students, because they followed Daniel's lead. They saw what God did for Daniel, how God was with Daniel, how God answered his prayer, how God proved that the faithfulness of Daniel would work out for him. And they learned this lesson, and they said, now we're not the students, now we're going to be the teachers. And these three, taught the king Nebuchadnezzar what their God could do. And as a result, it turned things around, and it caused worship unto their God in the whole kingdom of Babylon at this time. So our main takeaway is this: you got to stand for something or you'll fall for anything. And if righteous men do nothing, nothing will change. We must stand for right. And if we learn how to be a good student, then we will stand when it matters, and we will make a difference in our world. And if we learn how to be good leaders, we will also make a difference, and it will bring goodness in our world. So remember to be a good leader so that your students can stand when it's time. And remember to be a good student so you can be a good leader and stand up when it's time. Remember this story. God bless you.